Have you ever wondered if you could actually measure something like a spiritual experience? You know, those incredibly profound moments where you feel a sense of unity, of awe, of transcendence. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? Kind of like trying to catch lightning in a bottle. Well, believe it or not, scientists are tackling this head on. And in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how they're doing it using a surprisingly powerful tool. So, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll tackle that big question. Can you even measure the immeasurable? Then, we're going to put the scientific tool they built, a questionnaire, on trial. We'll look at its inner workings to see if it makes sense, then check if its scores can actually predict real change in people's lives. And finally, we'll see why having a tool like this is such a game changer for science. Okay, let's just dive right in. The absolute biggest challenge here is taking something that is so deeply personal and subjective, a mystical experience, and finding a way to study it with scientific objectivity. I mean, how on earth do you turn a feeling of cosmic connection into cold, hard data? Well, first things first, scientists have to agree on what they're even talking about. This isn't just any strong emotion. For researchers, a mystical experience has these very specific qualities: a powerful sense of oneness, a feeling of deep sacredness, the sense that time and space just melt away, and a classic feature called ineffability, which is just a fancy way of saying it's almost impossible to describe with words. And this brings us right to the heart of the matter. It seems almost, well, absurd, doesn't it? To think that a checklist, a simple questionnaire, could possibly capture an experience that people often describe as the most important moment of their entire lives. Can you really do that? Well, to answer that question, scientists went ahead and built a tool specifically for the job. It's called the Mystical Experience Questionnaire, or MEQ. The version we're looking at is a newer, 30-item version called the MEQ-30. And honestly, the best way to think about it is as a ruler. A ruler designed not for inches or centimeters, but to measure the dimensions of these profound inner states. But of course, just like any scientific tool, a telescope, a microscope, whatever, this new ruler has to be rigorously tested. You have to prove that it's accurate and reliable before anyone can trust the measurements. So that's what researchers did. They put the MEQ-30 on trial, using data from carefully controlled studies with psilocybin, a compound known to frequently occasion these very experiences. And that trial really boils down to two huge questions. First, what scientists call internal validity. Basically, do the questions on this ruler actually make sense together? Is there a logical structure to it? And second, external validity. This is the big one. Do the scores from this questionnaire actually predict anything meaningful in the real world, in a person's actual life? Let's see how it held up. All right, so let's start with that first test, the internal logic. Researchers used a fancy statistical technique called factor analysis. But all you really need to know is that they fed all the answers into a computer to see if the 30 different questions would naturally clump together into logical groups or themes. And check this out. This is what they found. The questions didn't just create a random jumble. They consistently and reliably sorted themselves into 4 very distinct but related themes or factors. There's a core mystical factor, a positive mood factor, one for transcendence of space and time, and that ineffability factor we mentioned earlier. This was huge. It showed the questionnaire has a really strong logical backbone. Now, what's really cool is how this new structure compared to older models. The researchers basically ran a bake-off. They tested to see if the data might fit better with some previous 3-factor models. And as you can see, the fit was poor. But their new 4-factor model, the fit was statistically acceptable, confirming it was by far the best and most accurate structure. So test number 1, passed. Now we move on to the second test. And you could argue this is the one that really matters. Okay, so you can get a high score on a questionnaire. So what? Does that number actually connect to real, lasting change in a person's life? This is the ultimate test of external validity. Just look at this graph. On the bottom, you have the scores from that core mystical factor. And on the side, you have how spiritually significant people rated their experience weeks after the fact. See that clear upward trend? The higher the score on the mystical factor, the more deeply profound and significant the memory of that experience was. That is a seriously powerful connection. And it didn't stop there. The predictive power was even broader. As you can see from these charts, the total score on the questionnaire was able to predict a whole bunch of positive long-term outcomes. Higher scores were linked to their experience being rated as one of the most personally meaningful of a person's entire life, to real increases in their well-being, and even to positive changes in their day-to-day behavior. Now, this is absolutely crucial. A skeptic might say, sure, but maybe these changes are just because people had a really intense drug experience. And the researchers thought of that. They ran the numbers again, but this time they statistically removed the effect of the overall drug intensity. And guess what? The connections were still there. It wasn't just about how strong the trip felt. It was the specific mystical quality of the experience, the thing the MEQ-30 measures, that predicted these benefits. Test 2 passed with flying colors. So, with both the internal structure and the external predictive power confirmed, the MEQ-30 was officially validated. It proved itself to be a reliable, accurate, scientific tool. And this gives researchers a really solid foundation to ask even deeper questions about how these experiences work and what they might mean for therapy. This validation work also allowed them to create a brand new, much clearer way to classify an experience. Now, to be officially considered a complete mystical experience, a person has to score at least 60% of the maximum possible score on all 4 of those factors we saw earlier. It's a simple definition, but it sets a pretty high bar. So how does this new streamlined scoring method compare to the old, more complicated one from the original questionnaire? Well, the agreement between them was over 90%. This is fantastic news. It shows the new, cleaner MEQ-30 is not only more robust, but it's also a much more efficient and reliable update. So let's just pull back for a second and ask, why does any of this matter? Well, for one, it means scientists finally have a trusted, validated tool for this research. This helps them get at the how. It suggests the mystical quality of the experience is a key ingredient for therapeutic benefits. It also creates a common language so different labs can finally compare the results apples to apples. It really moves the study of these profound states from just interesting stories into the realm of rigorous science. And all of this leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to end on. We've just seen how a really carefully designed tool can start to map the landscape of the mystical. It really makes you wonder, right? What other deep human experiences, things like love or creativity or sudden insight, are just waiting out there for us to invent the right ruler so we can begin to understand them in a whole new light?